Hello everyone, and welcome back to World of Warships Blitz with Terry. This is the second episode now of our series on gunnery and choice of ammunition. And today we'll be looking at destroyer guns. Now last time we had the 200mm cruiser main guns from the heavy cruiser lines, and we've seen that it certainly matters what kind of choice you make. So how about destroyers? Now destroyers have the smallest guns in the game. So obviously, in most cases, your armor piercing will not really have enough penetration power to get through much. Maybe with an exception of the German destroyer line, which tends to have 150mm main guns later on. And I think I've mentioned the reason was that the Germans didn't have enough destroyers, so they decided to put bigger guns on them to make them more competitive against the French and the British. If you want to have the basics about the difference between high explosive and armor piercing, we covered that in the last episode, so I'm not going to go through that anymore. But yes, destroyer guns. Usually you'll find that they are somewhere in the range between 120 and 130-ish millimeters. Like I said, except for the German destroyers. So the American destroyers, let's have a look at the Farragut, fires 127mm standard destroyer guns. They do almost as much HE damage as they do armor piercing damage. And even though the chance of setting fire isn't great, you have a relatively high fire rate. So in most cases, you're best off just sticking to the high explosive with these things. Except for certain situations when you are in extreme close range gunfights with other destroyers. And here it really comes down to the detail. Now, with destroyer guns, there isn't much of a difference. It's by no means as important as it is with, say, heavy cruisers to choose the right ammunition. You're totally fine to just stick with a high explosive out all the way through, and it's not going to break or make or break your game the same way it does for cruisers. But there are some finer points, and that's just kind of what I want to get into here. So here, the high explosive is probably a good choice because it does a lot of damage. And you have the chance of actually setting fires, and enemy destroyers don't have much in terms of armor, so you're mostly going to be able to also get high explosive penetrations on them. The Japanese destroyers, at least the gunboat line around in the lower tiers, tend to have slightly lower caliber, but then when we're going to the Hatsuharu, for example, we have again 127mm guns with a better fire chance. So again, high explosive is a good choice here. The German destroyers, the lower tier German destroyers actually have 105mm guns. And given that the German destroyers, they're doing almost as much armor piercing damage with these 105 mils than, say, the Americans with the 127 mils. So here, for these lower tiers, it might actually not be a bad idea, again, German ships, to try out the armor piercing occasionally. The Soviet ships have slightly larger caliber. So instead of the 120, 127 range, they have around 130 in the mid and slightly upper tiers here. And they do, as you can see, also more damage and have a good fire chance. So when would you use armor piercing in these things? Honestly, again, you don't really have to. You can just stick with high explosive and be very successful. But there are certain scenarios where it actually makes sense. So let's go out, for example, in the Minsk and just try that out a little bit. And I'll show you what I mean. All right, we've got a Benson and an Akatsuki on the enemy team. Now, American destroyers tend to be a little bit sturdier. But again, we're in a Soviet destroyer. So we have actually relatively powerful guns on these things. So we'll see what we're going to encounter, and we'll see at what ranges we're going to encounter them. General quarters. And off we go. And by default, for this caliber, it'll select the high explosive. And mostly that is the correct choice. Now I'm going to switch over to the armor piercing. Again, we've got two destroyers on the enemy team. I've got 130mm guns. And they're Soviet guns. They have a relatively good armor piercing. So let's just head over here and see if we catch anybody between these two little islands here. Against battleships, obviously, you don't really want to use armor piercing unless you have clean shots into the superstructure. With cruisers, with the Soviet destroyers, you can actually use it quite successfully. Again, it depends on the ship. So if you're talking about, say, if you're talking about a German cruiser or an American cruiser, you probably don't want. So I'm detected. That means there's a destroyer. Ah, there's the Benson. I was just switching. So let's see what we can do with the armor piercing against the Benson. He's probably got torps out. Here we see. With these 130 mils, we actually get full pens. There come the torps. And we're gonna have to dodge those. Okay. And he's still in range, so we'll just keep the fire up. But there's an Algeria who's just got taken an absolute beating. But there's also a North Carolina. So we keep firing the armor piercing against the Benson. But if the target is a battleship, we definitely want to switch over to high explosives. Because there's really no point of keeping the fire up with armor piercing against one of these things. The battleship's sailing away, so these torps are probably going to miss, which means I have to deal with the Benson again. Let's switch back over to the armor piercing, although the high explosive does full pens as well. Let's use our reload booster. We gotta dodge the torps. That's one. Let's send some out ourselves. We're really here for the guns, not the torpedoes. Now you see, even at close ranges, the guns are very effective and will consistently do full penetrations against an American destroyer. Which of course we can't see an American destroyer right now, which is unfortunate. Oh, there he is again. And there he goes. So, against destroyers, armor piercing will do more damage, even though you're not actually going to set fires. But, well, that's against destroyers, fires are not also super effective because they don't do a huge amount of damage. It's a percentage. Like against battleships, obviously, especially with a Soviet ship, you want to fire high explosive because then you can set them on fire. Now, there's no reason for me to be anywhere near here because our team is completely lemming training over this way, and there's only a single cruiser defending against that destroyer. So we need to get our butt over there. I've lost a lot of health because I wasn't paying attention. I took one torp. So let's get back over there. Again, this is not about the battle. This is about what we can do with the ammo types. But yeah, slight lull. Okay, the destroyer has killed our cruiser.
Defend our base.
Yep, I'm on it.
Affirmative.
And I'm up. There's an Akatsuki. So we want to use our armor piercing. Let's see what we do against him. Let's see if we can gun him down.
We hit the enemy.
Yes, we can. And again, we're doing reliable full pens against this ship. But now that the Akatsuki is dead, we need to switch back to... did he get torpedoes away? We need to switch back to high explosives and do something about the battleship that's heading over there.
Engine boost activated.
And see if we can dissuade him from capping us out. Although I don't think he's going to have the time for that. How much health is he on? So yeah, against battleships, that's a Lyon. Ugh. Okay, don't want to get close to that thing. So let's just kind of open up. Come on, fire your guns. There we go. You're gonna have to hit me. Are we just gonna rush this guy? Yeah, let's try to rush this guy. Let's see what we can achieve here. There we go with the fire. See, that's obviously against larger targets. You want to use the high explosives. You can use the armor piercing against cruisers if you're in a Soviet destroyer, especially at close range, to quite a good effect. Okay, let's see if we can just kind of outmaneuver him here.
Target hit.
Okay. Let's assume that he turns out, drops away. And of course the high explosive isn't going to penetrate. Oh, that's still got... Where are my torpedoes? Oh, there we go. Come on, come on, die, 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 die. No! Ah, so close. So yes, against light cruisers or heavy cruisers, you can use the armor piercing if you are at an extreme close range. And again, it depends on the cruiser, right? So if you're firing at something like a Nuremberg or a Shores or a Duca, you can use the armor piercing with a Soviet destroyer. Not so much with other destroyers. So if you try the same thing in a Japanese destroyer or in an American destroyer, you're not going to have great amounts of fun. So again, the high explosive does very comparable damage. The Soviet destroyers have very good fire chance. So it doesn't really matter that much. I mean, look at the difference. It's 420 versus 460. And if the high explosive has enough penetration power to get through a destroyer's armor and you do a full pen, then you're good to go. If the high explosive doesn't have enough penetration power and you can actually only get a semi-pen and you're doing about 200 damage, whereas you would do 400 odd with the armor piercing, then that would make more sense. But for a Soviet destroyer personally, if I'm fighting destroyers, other destroyers, or something like a light cruiser, I often switch to the armor piercing. It depends again on the nationality. The American light cruisers tend to be a bit sturdier. In other destroyers, it's a different story. So if I'm going out in, say, the Hatsuharu or in the Yudachi, with the Yudachi's got, I think, the Fubuki's guns. So yeah, she's got the 127 mils. There's no way in hell I'm going to use the armor piercing on these things because they are not going to be effective. Because they're Japanese guns, they're not going to be super effective against even against other destroyers. I'm mostly going to stick to the high explosive. Same thing with American destroyers. So far, I haven't found the American 127 millimeters to be punchy enough to really do, unless I'm at absolute point blank range, to really do anything. So if you're firing at a carrier, I mean, when are you going to fire at point blank range at a carrier? But if you do, I'm always going to use the high explosive on these things. German destroyers, different story. Even the 105 mils, I personally prefer firing armor piercing in them, just because the high explosive damage is so terrible. And the fire chance is so low that even if you get a couple of bounces, you might also get a couple of hits in the superstructure of an enemy ship and actually get some penetrations in. And then rely more on the torpedoes to do the job. So, in summary, destroyer guns, you're mostly good with just using high explosives. If you want to fine-tune it, in the German, obviously in the 150 mil Germans, the armor piercing makes a lot more sense. But so, for example, in the Soviet destroyer line, you can consider switching to armor piercing if you're firing at enemy destroyers. The Anshan, by the way, I think is a Gnevny class destroyer, so she probably has the exact same 130 mil guns. Yeah, there we go. So again, it's the same story. Observe your ship, observe the hits that you're doing, see if you do semi-pens or full pens against what target, at what range, and over time you get a feel for how your ship's behaving and how your guns are behaving, and switching ammunition is just becoming natural. If this is all too complicated for you and you're just a beginner and you just want to play destroyer, stick to the high explosives unless you're in German destroyers. That's it for today. Next week we'll be looking at probably the 150 mils of the light cruisers. Thanks everybody, and I'll see you next time. Bye.